Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I'm the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. I am your host, Maria Davis-Pierre, licensed mental health counselor and the CEO and founder of Autism in Black, Inc. Today, I am here with Ivory Duncan, who is an educator, consultant, and founder of Embracing Neuro-Diversity, a company committed to transforming how families and schools support neurodiverse children. With over 15 years of experience in education leadership, including roles as an assistant principal and senior director of post-secondary leadership design, Ivory blends professional expertise with personal passion as a mother of a brilliant child on the autism spectrum. Her work spans curriculum development, parent coaching, educator training, and inclusive literacy. Ivory is the creator of the Embracing Neuro-Diversity podcast and the author of a children's book series. She advocates for conscious parenting and culturally responsive practices that affirm neurodiverse brilliance. Through dynamic workshops, e-learning courses, and school partnerships, Ivory empowers communities to foster belonging, advocacy, and growth. Enjoy today's episode with me and Ivory. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. This is going to be a very special episode. We have a very special guest here today, Ivory Duncan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I like to start off my questioning with the podcast with the insight of you bringing both professional expertise and lived experience to this work. Can you start by sharing your personal journey with us as a mother and an educator?
Absolutely. So I have a 8-year-old. I usually say 7, but he just turned 8, named Khalil. And I learned that he was on the autism spectrum when he was 4. And prior to that, I had been an educator for over 15 years, former school leader, assistant principal, and I had worked with neurodiverse children throughout my career in different spaces and industries, but I didn't see the signs in my own son until obviously we got his diagnosis. And so that sort of is the merge of it. But I'll also say that when I look back, there were so many professional experiences that I had. Like, I've always been rooted in like DEI work. I've led a bunch of workshops for teachers around culturally responsive teaching, and I've always been sort of a huge advocate and a voice for how do we create inclusivity for children who learn differently. But it wasn't until my own son was diagnosed with autism that I really had to walk the talk, right? Like, I knew it, I believed it, I read all the books, but it wasn't until it hit home that I was like, you actually have to like live this out in real life. So
And that's similar for me, being the therapist, having worked in schools. I realized when we had our daughter, like, oh my gosh, like this is different. This is actually my kid. I am not therapist Maria when I'm interacting with my kids. I am mom, and I lose a lot of that skill because I am fueled by the emotions of being a parent. So it is so totally different.
it's very different because it's personal, and like logically what are like the best approaches, but because it hits home, you lose sight of all of that, all of the fears, all of the reservations come in. But it also gave me a greater level of empathy for parents that I've worked with over the years. Before I was even a parent, I had worked with parents of children who are on the autism spectrum. And I was endearing and compassionate, and I worked alongside of them, but I couldn't really understand the gravity of what they were feeling until I had my own child and realized he was also autistic. And I was like, if I would have known what I know now, I would have again, I was always super compassionate and advocate with the parents I worked with then, but I would have been much more hands-on with them. So, everything happens as it should, but
Does. It does. And I want to shift gears and talk a bit about conscious parenting. You talk about conscious parenting as a powerful shift for raising neurodivergent kids. What does it look like in practice? Because I know that people often think conscious parenting means there's no boundaries for your kids, that they can do what they want to do. But what does that look like, especially for Black families who are navigating these systems?
I love that question. Thank you for asking. In its most simplest form, it really means being aware of how you are interacting with your child, right? And I talk about this a lot on my own platforms for parents who look like us because the language doesn't feel familiar. And so to your point, they're going to feel like, well, what does this mean? Like, does it mean I ignore their behaviors? No, it means that essentially when we come into our parenting experience, it's as good intended as we want to be, we are still bringing in our lived experience, our own experience as children, and how we were parented. It's subconscious, right? And so we have all these. I know I did have all these dreams around how the type of parent I wanted to be. I read all the books when I was pregnant with Khalil, but it wasn't until I had him and I started to parent that I realized that I had my own traumas. I had my own anxieties that I was projecting upon him, even before I knew he was autistic, before he was diagnosed with autism. But then afterwards, I was like, you need to be even more aware of how you're responding. And so essentially what it is stepping back, pausing, unpacking how you were parented as a child. What were some of your disappointments? What were some of the things that you wish could have been done differently for you? And starting to, in some ways, bring compassion into your own childhood so that you can be a little bit more compassionate and patient with your child. So essentially it means being aware of how you respond. If you make a mistake and you get frustrated and overwhelmed and you may raise your voice, that's okay. But then realizing, okay, the next time, how can I do this differently? So it's about being on the journey of improving and being aware of your parenting as opposed to being reactive and coming from a place of fear.
I love that, being more proactive rather than reactive.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you make a great point because I think a lot of people think that it's perfection and it's not. I am constantly apologizing to them, Pierre, 3 kids.
Yes.
Mommy was wrong. I'm sorry I did that.
Yes.
Because parenting, especially for Black mothers, we carry a lot of how society expects us to be, how we expect ourselves to be and what we uphold ourselves to. And it's overwhelming and it gets frustrating. So there are many missteps I have made that I've had to apologize. I probably have to apologize at some point today to one of them kids.
Listen, it's a part of our regular routine, and I'm very much so. I also fundamentally believe, which is why I'm like a champion for conscious parenting, is that our kids come to us really like as mirrors to show us the things that we need to improve within ourselves, that we need to like heal within ourselves, quite honestly. And so there are times when, as a great thing about being unaware and conscious parenting, there are times when you do something, like this was the best, it probably wasn't the best approach, but it needed to happen as it relates to how you communicate or engage with your child. And there are times when you're like, in your gut, I made a mistake, right? Or this is an area of growth for me. And so our children hold up mirrors to us. And so not only is it an opportunity for you to create safe spaces for them, but it's an opportunity for you to grow if that is your commitment. And it should be as a parent, it's an opportunity for you to grow as a human being as well. And I especially believe that about our children who are neurodiverse.
I love that. And speaking of growing and growth as a parent, how do you help parents unlearn those deficit-based mindsets and embrace their child's brilliance, especially when we're having to deal with schools or providers who really only focus on what's done wrong and they're not looking at those strengths?
Yes, it's a journey and it's a process. It's not it's not overnight, but I can only work with parents who have a foundation level of wanting of understanding that there is room for improvement, right? And so in starting there, I honestly I push back on a lot of their own mindsets about how they feel about themselves and how they feel about themselves in society around them. So because to your point, a lot of our the ways in our deficit thinking and the ways that we feel about our children is influenced by how society is going to respond to them. And so we're afraid. And so we turn that fear into projecting on our children like fear-based mindsets, right? And so I began to ask, like, first, like, tell me about how you feel about yourself. Like, how often are you giving compassion to yourself? When I hear them saying like, well, my child he or she doesn't do these things, or they don't listen, they're not, all the things that we are frustrated by. I step back and ask about like, what type of affect are you presenting? Because oftentimes the energy that we bring to our homes and our engagement with our children, they respond to that. So really, you are the psychiatrist. You're more in this field. I'm an educator, but really truly it's about unpacking how you feel about yourself, and then we begin to talk about your children. But I will say too, like, my sweet spot is I've been working in schools for as long as I have. I've seen firsthand the anxiety that parents have about school systems, right? And I've seen it as an administrator and then as a parent myself. Like, I was super privileged that I had the experience of working in schools for so long that when my son was diagnosed with autism and then he started kindergarten, I felt empowered right away to go into those IEP meetings and be like, listen, this is what we need to do. I wasn't intimidated by the staff because I'd worked with people like this throughout my career, right? But I realized in talking to parents who don't have a background in education that they really have a level of they don't name it this, but there's an anxiety around going into school buildings, especially Black moms, especially parents from certain socioeconomic backgrounds, right? And that's a valid feeling because they've had their own traumatic experiences in schools. And then they're putting their kids into these schools. And so this stuff is like deeply rooted. And so I really like unpack that too. Like, you are afraid to talk to the people who are educating your children. You're afraid of how they're going to perceive you. So how do we instill in you a level of like trusting your gut, trusting your instincts, and building your confidence a little bit? I feel like I just went on a tangent there, but there's a tie there around like it all starts with us.
It does. And to your point, as a clinician and then as someone who also has background in education, as a parent, education brings me more anxiety than dealing with healthcare professionals because my children are in school a lot more around admin and teachers than they do when they see their therapist once a week for an hour. They're in that school 6 hours a day, and it brings me more anxiety to know that you may not be neuroaffirming. You may not know how to follow my child's IEP. For some parents who don't have the wording to be like, are you following my child's IEP? What supports and resources do they need? So the school system does bring a lot more of that anxiety because they are there a lot more. So you make a great and valid point with that because it can get scary because you're officially having a huge role in shaping my child. And if your mindset is in that deficit base or in a negative space, then that is going to impact them.
It really will. And it's not it our fears are legitimate, right? Like we've heard the stories, we've read the news. It's happened to a lot of our peers and families. We've seen how children have been mistreated or receiving like less than satisfactory education. So the feelings are valid. I've also seen firsthand how staff members and administration talk to parents in a way that is not affirming and is disempowering, which is another part of the work that I do, is working with educators on how to be more inviting. And so it's a real thing, but really it always starts with the parent. How your children experience you and how they experience the world is going to depend upon how you create space for them. And so that's essentially the work that I do.
And in talking about your work, you've held leadership roles across the educational systems and now leading Embracing Neuro-Diversity. What inspired you really to take this leap, and how are you working with schools and family to create real change?
Yeah, it really based, honestly, essentially what I just mentioned to you. I've been doing this work for so long, and I'm one of those people too that I tend to turn painful experiences into something that is purposeful to make sense of it all. And I don't think it's a coincidence that even before working in schools, I had a small, right out of college, I had a small, I think maybe like 9 months working for the Children Protective Services, specifically in their department for children who are autistic who were in the foster care system, right? And this was like, I was like 21 years old, and I worked there for like 9 months. But I had a small caseload of, now that I think about it, all Black boys and one Black girl who were all autistic. At the time, I didn't know the full scope of what it really meant to be autistic. I knew that they had learning differences. I knew that they showed up in the world differently, but that's as far as I could understand it. And my job was to help find safe homes for them. And those kids left an impact on me for the trajectory of my career. And this was before I even had my own son, right? And so that experience, and then starting to work in schools, and then having Khalil, stepping back, I'm really into personal development also. And so stepping back and doing my own self-reflection, I really truly believe that that thread was like, you should be doing this work. You've seen it from a myriad of perspectives, and it is a lived experience for you. And I'm also like, if I'm having this experience with my son, where like we have our struggles, every day, like any other parent, like he has his meltdowns, he has his unpredictable moments, but I also, and so there was a learning curve for me, and I also was invested in the journey because of the work that I did. And so I was like, if I'm having this experience, and we know the statistics, there are thousands of other parents out there who are having a similar experience but don't have the tools. Like, at least if I have it, why not share it? So that's what it was inspired by. And we've been on this journey since December of 2022, and it's building traction. And I'm hoping that what I'm doing is helping parents out there. And so far, it seems like it has. So.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure it has. I know that that's how Autism in Black came about, from turning that pain into purpose. And I see that with a lot of organizations that we interact with. It's like, it's not there, y'all out here causing all this trauma and harm. Let me create what I would have loved to have.
Yes, yes.
I love that you've done that.
Absolutely. And I'm not someone who sits back. If I see that, first of all, we know how we feel about our children. We love it. The big, I mean, it's not a misconception, but I do always have to say, just as much as parents, how they love their kids, we love our kids just as much, right? And so when I'm the type of person, if I see that there aren't opportunities that exist for my child and other kids like that, I don't sit back to just wait. I'm like, okay, so how can we create something? Like, I've always been that way before becoming a mom, where it's like, if it's not available, how can we build it? And then also, I've always had my own experience. We all have. If you're Black, if you're a woman in this country specifically, I've had my own experience with inequity, and so it's one of those things where it's like, I can't sit idly by and allow my child and children like him to have to suffer through this system. And it's somewhat inevitable because the systems are designed to function the way that they function. And so that's even more of a reason for us to create the spaces that we know are going to support our children. So.
And then talking about creating affirming education and things of that nature, I know that you have created a children's book series based off of your son, called Khalil's Journey.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about this book series, and also talk about why representation is so crucial, especially for our Black neurodivergent kids?
Absolutely. So I've always been an avid reader. Reading saved my life growing up, and it started from like being interested in children's books and growing into like my own development. And when I first learned that I was pregnant with Khalil, I became obsessed with it. I want to get all of the children's books. I wanted to reflect what he looked like. Representation has always been huge for me. I think being Black is probably the greatest gift that you can have. And so I surround myself with things with Blackness. And so it was a no-brainer to me. It was less about representation and more like this is just a reflection of our reality. Like it shouldn't be unique or different. It just is. So I became consumed with getting books for him that reflected him, reflected our culture. And we would read it to him throughout his maturation. But again, when I learned that he was neurodiverse and time went by, there are similar books out like the ones that I've written for my son, but not as many as there should be, right? And so that's what inspired is that my love for reading and books and my love for creating stories that reflect my son and children like him. But the other piece I'll say about this is that there are books that show up a particular way. What I love about my books is that they're culturally affirming. Like the mom has a hairstyle that women that we know have her nails are eccentric, and so I love that. So when people get the book, they'll see that like we show up in the images in the way that we see women like us in our culture show up. So that's essentially what inspired it. And then last I'll say about this is the early literacy piece is super huge for me. My son is semi-verbal, and so he'll ask for what he wants. He's not conversational. And so part of what inspired the books was that I wanted to, in some ways, amplify his voice. I wanted to like hear his voice in different spaces, and that in a way that it doesn't show up because he's not conversational, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's what inspired it: amplifying his voice, amplifying early literacy, and ensuring that we are showing up in spaces that we usually don't show up in.
I love that. That is a lot of the reason that I created our Express Feelings line, is also having that representation and seeing what feelings look like on Black kids, and Black
Mhm.
kids with afros, Black kids with locks, Black kids with a fade, right? With the boosted.
Yes, yes,
So understanding that we come in all different shades and our hair and texture is different, but a lot of times we do not see that in schools. Like we don't see us. And I think that's where that gap is. So I'm happy that you have created a line that can be used in schools and kids can see themselves in, and parents can see themselves in. Because when you're talking about eccentric nails, that's going to be me, right? I'm gonna have the nails done.
yes, yes. And I want to normalize it, right? But the stories are specifically geared towards the lived experience of families with children on the autism spectrum. So there's one around picky eating. There's one around pool rules, safety, swim safety. There's one around taking your child to the park and them not being able to communicate with kids, but still figuring out how to learn to play. And my son had his and he's transitioned out of that, but for a very long time, his special interest was Old MacDonald. And so he would sing that over and over. So there's one about farm animals. And so I wanted to make sure that also parents were able to see something. It's like, my child is a picky eater too, or my child, the swimming thing is scared. Like I wanted to amplify like the uniqueness of our experience as well.
I love that. Make sure you guys are gonna go and get that
Thank
book series. We're gonna have those links in our show notes as well.
you.
As we begin to wrap up, I want to ask you, for the parent or the educator who's just starting this journey, what's one piece of advice you'd offer to begin shifting their mindset towards advocacy and not apology?
Mhm. You probably heard this before, but I feel like it's so important to say like two things. First of all, you didn't do anything wrong.
Mm.
Second, your child is not broken.
Ooh.
And if you haven't internalized that yet, at least in the beginning, repeat it to yourself until it's internalized, because those are the two things that you're going to want to need and remember in order to get to a place of advocacy, of like minimizing your deficit mindset and moving towards an asset-based mindset. Like, you did nothing wrong and your child is not broken.
I love that. And finally, what does a liberated future for Black neurodivergent children look like to you?
Girl, that's a whole other podcast episode because I have a whole vision in my head. But I mean, what's coming up for me, honestly, is safety. Is safety at the foundational level. We can't do anything else unless our children feel safe and are safe, right? And that requires a bunch of things in our moving pieces in our society to shift. But in the most liberated space is safety, and that is like when they step out into the world, people don't see them as strange or a threat, but they see them again in the beauty of where they are. And so our structures and our systems need to be set up in a way where wherever our children show up, they are not only safe, but they are able to thrive in those spaces. Like, that's the ideal world that I'd love to see.
I love that. Moving from surviving to thriving. That's what safety is so crucial. So thank you for that. I know that people are going to be wanting to know where they can reach you at, where they can hire you for some workshops, bring you into schools for some culturally responsive training.
Absolutely.
That they can find you, how they can get your book and things of that.
Thank you. All social media platforms, Embracing Neuro-Diversity, podcast under the same name, and the links that you'll provide, that once you click one link, it'll take you everywhere. And also you can Google my name, Ivory, and it'll come up there as well. So
thank you. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for being transparent and sharing yourself with us. I want to give you your flowers for doing that. So thank you.
Same to you. Thank you for being a leader in this space. You certainly have inspired me and many others. So keep going. I know it's not easy, but thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. Don't forget to share your takeaways from the show on your IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find and share them. If you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community at facebook.com/group/AIBpod.